Alexander the Great had said there's 4 ways to be able to control society, and that's give them healthcare, give them education, give them athletics, and give them entertainment. And now we have all of that in seconds in our hand. You know,
more.
and
Instant
and
dopamine.
more instant dopamine. And it's like, if you can keep people distracted, you can do what you want as a empire.
Especially if you're distracting the 50 to 60% of the people who aren't even paying attention.
Yeah.
Then you just really got to distract the people over here. And then
Well, and you don't even have to deliver well on all 4 of those, because I would contend that we don't provide good health care
Right.
at all.
Right.
Period.
Right.
We don't, but we've got the other 3.
But I think we've replaced healthcare with individualism. I think we keep people from being in groups because, again, back to Rome, a lot of what happened in Rome was you had the barbarians, different sects of people that were still remaining in those groups that were like, hey, we don't like this. We're going to fight back against it. We've pushed so much individualism in America that, we don't even come together as groups anymore.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned barbarians. I tell my students that here are the dangerous words when you're teaching history. Always, every time, when you're talking, there are no absolutes, honestly. But I've told them this, that when we look at empires, and when we start to look at when an empire has a military, the moment the leader or the leaders began to hire military, they began to hire from outside their ranks. When they hire mercenaries, that's the beginning of the fall. Because once you start hiring mercenary armies, they are no longer loyal to you. They are loyal to this.
Right.
And typically in history, a lot of the mercenaries were Germanic barbarians, and they were considered barbarians because they were Germanic. They didn't bathe, they didn't take care of themselves, but man, they could fight. They were violent, and they could fight very, very well. So the Germanic tribes typically made up those bands of people that were hired for military service. So the moment you hire a group of people to fight for you, and this is played out through history, what's to keep them from taking more money from the opposition to not fight?
So let me ask you that then, in reference to America, because America already does this. They've been doing it for years by hiring their former CIA operatives and special forces people to go in and be contract work overseas. Is that the same thing along the lines of what you're talking about, or is that
no? I'm
different?
talking about like full blown militaries.
Oh,
so
okay.
like our military works because it's volunteer.
Gotcha.
We don't have conscription.
Okay.
Whereas in other countries around the world, you're required to serve a certain number. Once you hit 18, you have to serve. Like in South Korea, once you hit 18, you have to serve a certain amount of time. But here, when you hire a former general, I think a lot of that comes with the comfort level of knowing he or she understands the inner workings of how our intelligence gathering works. And be hard pressed to say, and I'm probably a little bit on the outside looking in terms of how I feel about this, as far as it relates to our country and hiring people to be operatives and things like that to go out and watch things around the world. One, I wouldn't want to do it.
Right.
I don't have the skill set to do it. And 3, I don't want to know what they're doing, and I don't want to know where they're doing.
Yeah.
All I want to know is that, are we safe? Are we safe in this country? And, and I talk about this a lot when I teach government. And I talk about it in AP World. The term trade-offs. What are you willing to give up in order to have this?
Peace of mind.
Peace of mind. Because 9/11 was a big wake-up call for our country. We'd been sitting back on our heels and kind of, basking in the glow of being a very young country and having all these things, having a very high standard of living, having high GDP, having a high average income, mean income. And things were, we're kind of chugging along pretty well. And then, boom, out of nowhere, this happens.
Yeah.
and it's not a country. And I think for a lot of people in this country, they don't understand the difference between Vietnam, Korea, World War I and World War II, and what's happening now, because terrorism doesn't have a country. It's everywhere. Mm-hmm. We have domestic terrorists. There are people in this country that prey on our downfall.
Yeah. Well, I think that's similar to, like we're going to talk about the rise of Rome, the rise of America too. America rose to such power so fast, you know, and it's like you said, we just kind of sat back and we're like, oh, we're at the top, you know. It's like, and
it's interesting how we get to the top.
Yeah.
You know, thank you, World War One.
Yeah.
World War II.
And then World War II. World War One specifically because we as a country going into when World War One started, and we're still expanding westward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We do not have a strong military. We don't have a strong economy. We're still very agrarian.
Well, everything was still very mechanical.
It's still very mechanical. And I would venture to say that in terms of, like, we weren't even a top 10 economy around the world. We were not a top 10 military. And we didn't start the war. We didn't get involved until the last, 24 months?
Yeah.
And in 24 months, we go from being
the assassination?
Franz Ferdinand. But we didn't get involved until the sinking of the Lusitania, until the unrestricted submarine warfare, where they're sinking passenger ships that we now know the U.S. was using to smuggle supplies, military supplies, to our allies, our quote unquote allies. So, and when I say quote unquote, that means, you know, we weren't outwardly allied with them. We were neutral. But then we get in, and in 24 months, we go from being unranked. It's like the Notre Dame football team, man. We go from being unranked to we help win a war, and all of a sudden we're number one. The voters love us again. We're like number one. And then we go back to isolation.
Yeah.
We're like, we're not. So there's a lot to be seen. And then, you know, how we help rebuild Europe to keep what happened in lead up to World War II, the interwar period, from happening again. And then we get involved in conflicts today, and then we turn around and we help rebuild. Well, I mean, you kind of have to. I mean, you're pot committed, because if you don't, then you end up with guys with, you know, funny mustaches out there attracting a large following. And he wasn't the only one speaking out in Germany during this time. There were a lot of different political ideologies out there. He was just better at it.
Yeah. And
people started to follow him, and there's a lot of a lot of danger in that, because we don't know what it's like there, and we can compare it to here. We can compare it to Rome. We can compare it to Greece. Anytime a country has fallen or an empire has fallen, and then you have somebody come along that starts speaking about, well, you know, hey, I could do a better job.